I think we're a gang now. I think we've probably collected just about everybody we're going to collect. Let's take a quick peek. One or two more stragglers coming down the hall. And what I decided to do with this session is, rather than another sit and get, I wanted to have a conversation with folks and just answer your questions. I have a number of members of my leadership team here with me today. So I think it's important that you folks have an opportunity to just get your questions answered about anything that you've heard in the last 2 days, or any of the process work that we've done, or where you're headed when you go back to your school systems in the coming days. So with that, I'll open it up. Let's see, let me just, I think everybody knows Michael Turmel over here, Ellen Hume Howard, Ann Hadwin. Mr. Vanderels, I'm going to include you, you're still part of the team here. And then of course we have Marion Graffair in the back and Deputy Commissioner Paul Leather. So what kinds of questions do you folks have about this process from a leadership perspective? What can we help you to answer and feel more comfortable about all this work?
Just generally, if we're interested in joining the initiative, what is the timeline and the expectations for like year 1, year 2, year 3, and commitment on time frame, and to bring a message back to the at the district level.
Okay, so the question was, in terms of timeline, if you're interested in getting involved in this process, what that timeline would be, and how what that might look like. So, Paul or Mary Ann, I'm going to, from a state perspective.
The timeline for getting involved?
Yep.
Well, today is the first day of Tier 2, Tier 3, and then you begin with, when you're in Tier 2, you begin with connections with Center for Collaborative Education. I believe that their first planning session for leaders is on August 10th, isn't that correct, Dan?
Yep.
Yes. And then after that, during that session, they will plan dates for 4 cross-district meetings throughout the year and several webinar meetings throughout the year. For tier 3, you would have you would have a meeting with Paul and I in Concord, where we will plan out the individual in-district supports that we will have, and that will happen sometime in the fall.
I neglected to, I missed Dan French sitting with us as well.
And Ellen?
Yeah, Marion, I was just, could you define the different tiers? Because I've had that question a couple of times, and like some people skipped over and gone right to Tier 1, and so what does that look like?
I'm going to stand up because I have people tell me a small voice if I sit down.
Marion, could you move up here because everybody's facing this way?
Okay. I sat in the back so I could observe who was talking. I didn't know I was going to speak. The Tier 3 is our beginning districts, and those are districts that are looking for some support in developing and implementing their competencies. And we have competencies consultants that help with that. And they work with you on the district level. We also are interested in getting you involved with the work-study practices competencies, which is a wonderful place to start with competencies because there's already a network ongoing, and it's fun work and rewarding work, and kids really take to it. So it can be a good dive into competencies work in the classroom. At Tier 2 are our practicing districts. And that is where we get you involved in pretty intense work in developing and practicing the administration of performance assessment tasks. There are few requirements. We ask that you use the same template that we use for Tier 1, but you don't have to when you're practicing. The Center for Collaborative Education kind of negotiates and navigates all of those differences amongst districts, and as the year goes on, gets the best practices more in the forefront so that more districts are using more of the best practices no matter where you started with the process. So it's a matter of learning, all of your teachers learning to create the performance tasks, learning to implement them in their classrooms, learning to score them, and then practicing in-district collaboration. Tier 1 is when you move that practice into the accountability system. So there has to be measures that assure that there's comparability across districts if it's used for accountability. So that's where, in addition to your local classroom performance assessments, you start working with a common assessment in each content area that it is the same as your cross-district team. So Ellen is the one that helps districts to develop and ensure the quality of those common performance assessments, administer them in a common way, and then have cross-district calibration, which is extremely exciting when your teachers start seeing that they are as rigorous as other districts around them. So those are the 3 tiers and the differentiated supports that we give you for that.
Good question. Any clarifying points on what Mary Ann just shared?
Well, if I could just add, we do hope that if you're interested in pursuing this, that you've completed an application coming from your superintendent, signed by your superintendent. We also ask that your school board be apprised of it and indicate that they're in support of it, and that you get that to myself and Marianne. We have, last year we actually did a kind of a window to do that. This year it's been on the department website since January, and we haven't done a window. We're just having folks come in as they come. And one of the questions we ask you is, where do you think you are? And we've been kind of evolving that question. The work that Ellen presented today around the readiness tool to some degree supports that. But again, knowing what the tiers are matters, right? So if you're really just starting competency education and you really are diving into that, then Tier 3 might be the right place. If you think you've implemented some key pieces of competency education and you're ready to do a deep dive into performance assessment, then that's really Tier 2. And then if you've done those 2 things over previous years, then Tier 1 is the place to go. What we haven't seen this past year is folks move up from Tier 2 to Tier 1, and we're now thinking that maybe what we need to do is be in touch with you and have annual kind of conversations about where you are. Some of the folks who started in Tier 1, they didn't go through any of this, right? But they'd done a fair amount of work ahead of time. But not all of them, to be honest with you. So it really has to do with how ready you think your community is to try this new kind of a system of assessment and accountability, and how ready your faculty are in implementing it. So that's the way you want to think about it.
At what point did you get your community involved with the process?
We started very slowly. This is, as you probably heard in the last, yesterday and probably again today in different sessions, we started this process years ago, and so we moved very slowly in terms of changing our report card, making small little changes along the way, and garnering that community support as we went along. So I don't know that there was one point in time where we said, okay, now today we're going to roll it out to the community. We made small changes along the way, and that facilitated the buy-in from the community at large. It's been an interesting path because we have had some resistance and some pushback, but we've been able to, for the most part, garner the community's support, parental support, except for some of the very what were typically the high-performing kids and the high demand parents, if you will.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, Dr. Blake, that I think we made some strategic decisions along the way as we were making changes. And one of the decisions that we made, I think, was critical, was that we didn't make one shift where we stopped reporting in the old way and started this new way. That we didn't take information away from parents, we just started giving them more information. So when we switched over report cards district-wide, we always reported on final course grades. When we started going sort of full steam into competency-based model, we kept the overall course grade. It's just that now on our report cards, we added individual competency grades that contributed to those overall course grades. So in some districts, neighboring districts even, they tried to do away with the old system and replace it with something new. And that caused a lot of problems, right? So what we decided to do was to try to keep as much of what we used to give parents so they would feel some familiarity, but then also just give them more information than they ever had before. That was critical.
I mean, just to add to that, the reporting piece, we also observed some other districts around us who built 15-page report cards. That did not go over well. And we knew that, you know, your temptation is to give parents everything, right? Well, what our parents said was, we don't want everything. And so we knew that going in, so we kept us short. The other thing I was going to add is that, you know, it's interesting when the public wasn't very happy with us 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And they wanted change, and that's one of the reasons why Dr. Blake came to the district. But we sort of used and leveraged those feelings to move ourselves forward. They said that we didn't have high enough standards. They said that we weren't holding kids accountable. And so we presented our ideas for moving the district forward, and we basically said, we're going to raise standards, this is how we're going to do it. So our school board really, in my mind, communicated to the public that this is what we're doing. And so if you have any of that naysayer stuff, you may want to make it work for you. Just saying.
How did you establish digestible goals for faculty? Maybe I don't know if they're annual competency-based education goals, but how did you make it digestible for faculty, and how are those goals treated?
Okay. So the question was, people in the back, how did we develop digestible goals for the faculty in terms of this work? It was a process, and we took our time. We did a lot of research around it, established best practices in discussions with the faculty, and really took it in chunks. We spent the whole year working on developing our learning how to develop good rubrics for stuff. And so there wasn't, I don't think that we were rushed through our process.
Just to piggyback on that, Dr. Blake, one of the things we did was, in the session yesterday for the elementary folks, we talked about developing one performance assessment over the course of the school year that was high quality and rigorous. So that's what we focused on, but there are many pieces of a good, high quality, rigorous performance assessment that are part of that. So we just tried to break it apart and move slowly through that process so that we knew that we were doing it well. And then teachers also developed SMART goals that were specific to data, and we tracked that year to year and throughout the year. And what the discussions within the teams naturally went to, how are we going to help these students progress? And so looking at the assessments and the instruction that was happening in classrooms was a natural byproduct of those conversations, and then everything really fit together at that point. So
I can't emphasize the whole notion that this is a journey. This isn't something that we were able to accomplish in 1 or 2 or even 3 years. And so I think that it is smaller chunks that you need to look at as you go through the process. Because if you go back to your school districts thinking that this is an easy turnkey operation, it's not. It's going to get it gets messy, and it does take a lot of time. Ellen?
I think too, one of the things is that we sort of walked the walk. We were moving into competency-based, mindset for our teachers, so we took a competency-based mindset as a leadership team. We came up with 3 bigger competencies that we knew would support lots of little things along the way. I'm gonna let Michael tell his initiative story, because that's the best one. But one of the things about that was that it refocused everything we did, and we stopped being members of educational flavor of the week. And you guys know what I'm talking about. Someone goes to a workshop, they come back, this watercolor writing, this is the best, it's my favorite. Okay, we stopped doing that, because then we'd say that doesn't get us to what we need to do. So we, as a leadership team, we did stop some of that run amok stuff that was happening.
The other thing I would add is that, to answer, I guess, real directly the goal-setting question, we recognize that there were multiple layers to goals. And so there are some decisions and some goals that are just more appropriate to be made at the leadership level. And so we set the course and we say this is the direction we're going. Our district relies very heavily on the work of our professional learning communities. So once we set the course and said this is the direction we're going, how can you as an individual and how can you as a member of this PLC help us to get to that objective? And so PLCs set goals to help the district to get to this new place. And then individually, they have the individual professional development goal that has to help their PLC, which has to help the district. So we also, another critical thing in terms of setting goals is we sort of ascribe to the concept that Richard Dufour's talks about, loose decision-making and tight decision-making. So some things, those tight things are the things that administrators, leadership, you have to make those decisions. They're a tough call, but you have to make a decision. And the loose things are the ones that you're willing to let sort of percolate and let staff sort of get their mind around and start to share experiences and opinions. One of the most critical things that we did was we defined the word consensus. We said that when a decision was going to go out to a larger group, we weren't going to take a vote, but we were going to operate under consensus. And we actually came up with our own Sanborn definition of what consensus was, and it's when the will of the group is evident and all voices have been heard, right? And so you kind of get that feeling when you cross that line into consensus and, okay, the decision's been made. But that was critical from a goal-setting perspective, that we have multiple layers of goal setting, all feeding in the same direction. Some decisions are top-down, and some are very much grassroots.
Question?
One question, I was thinking along the lines of community preparation, and knowing that the desires of parents on the elementary, middle, and the high school level can be quite different. Were you intentional in thinking about your strategy on where change was effected first?
Were we intentional? Well, I think for us, the natural fit for some of the early changes was at the elementary level, because they're doing performance assessments anyway. Most of the stuff that they're teaching is assessed by performance tasks, and so instead of the mandate, if you will, came out years ago that high schools had to have competencies for all their courses, high school courses, by X date, and we did, but we also saw that it was a natural fit to do a K-12, and so we developed ours as a K-12 system. The changes, I think, were easier to make at the elementary level, to our report card and to parent reporting and conversations with parents, such that the parents love the report cards that they're getting. And we took their feedback. They made suggestions for us on things that they didn't like, certain wording in the report, and we changed it, okay? And so we were able to come to agreement on that. And so we made the changes throughout the system much easier at the elementary and middle level. And now what's happening is, as the kids are coming up through the system, they don't know any different. And so it'll be easier, and we anticipate it'll be easier in coming years, as opposed to having a system at the high school that now you're trying to backfill at the lower levels. And I think we're seeing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happened, because we approached it K-12, we started to cultivate a culture of respect between the levels that normally doesn't happen. You know, usually it's, all those elementary teachers, they screwed up the kids and now they come to middle school. And that whole like ripple effect, we knew that that was a mindset here, and what we did in approaching it K-12 is that we made it that we were all doing this together. And very early on, the high school, God bless them, the administration came in and brought an elementary idea to the high school. And were completely transparent about the fact that this had been perfected at the elementary level, but it was a best practice for kids. It was a relearn and reteach, and they've changed it in many ways since. But they introduced it as, hey, this is best practice, it's working at the elementary level, we're gonna adopt it here, we're gonna make it work. Well, the minute the high school starts adopting best practices in the elementary, now everyone's like, really? Seriously? That just doesn't happen, and so I think that we changed the playing field a little bit in the culture of our professionals.
I think the reality is that we have this list of about 18 or 19 things that we've compiled of questions that when you go into competency-based learning structures, you have to at some point address every one of those questions. One of those questions that Ellen is alluding to is intervention. You can't raise the standard for kids, right, and say the bar used to be here and you accumulate points, and if you get above the bar, you pass. And now say that your work is going to be compared against some exemplar or a rubric and expect that everybody's going to reach that, right? So you're going to have to provide some supports for kids who need supports. You're also going to have to provide some extensions for kids who are already meeting that standard and are ready to move on. The idea that Ellen talks about frequently is going on safari in your district. So there are these 18 or 19 things that we've had to come, through experience to discover. You probably have examples of excellence in your district somewhere where somebody is doing one of those 18 or 19 things already. And so you're going to be able to take what's working well in another building and implement it into your building, right? So one of the things that we did is we shared a lot of best practices, not only through researching together and reading together, but saying, this is what, John would say, this is what we're doing in LEAP at the elementary school for intervention. And we'd say, okay, how could we adapt that to the high school? So I think just knowing what you already have, because I think you probably have some very competency-friendly based things going on in your district that you're not aware of. And if you reach out to teachers and say, how many of you are doing these things, and you provide that list of them, they'll be able to say, oh, I'm doing that. And then you'll share with those teachers exactly how they're implementing that.
Yeah, the positive to that is when the high school got obviously the most pushback on any kind of grading change, as you can imagine. And we laid the groundwork to be, pretty smooth. But when we went to a 4-point scale as opposed to a 100-point scale, those type of things, the fact that the entire district was doing the same scale, the fact that it was very much, we supported them. Like the other levels had their back because this is what we've been doing, and I think that was really helpful. Instead of letting a school, there's always this idea that, oh, let one school pilot it and get good at it. But see, there's danger in that because they're an island unto themselves, right? And so you gotta pick how you're gonna go at it. We picked doing it as a team, all together, and it helped us in our community.
I've been very appreciative of all of the materials that you've released and looking at your competency documents and so on. How can we get a hold of those 18 and 19 questions?
We actually have a list of them.
He's got them.
We're starting we have a design studio starting tomorrow on competency education. It's the very first thing we're going to ask our folks, our guests to do is, what do you want to know more about? And we're going to provide the list of them, so it's something we can get to you very easily.
Awesome.
Did you have to make any scheduling changes for teachers to have time? That's a big thing, is finding the time, especially in the middle school, in a small school, where you have one teacher per grade and you have one special a day.
Yep.
And so have you come across that, and how did you make that time?
We did, and the whole notion of professional learning communities that's the foundation of all of our work And so we've been able to, thankfully, work our schedules so that we have common time for the professional learning communities to work together throughout the week. In addition to their individual prep time, they have team time together. And I know it is more difficult to do in some of the smaller schools, and we haven't run into that. But the do-fors do offer a lot of different alternative schedules and ways to manage time for teachers so that they have the time built into their schedules to do that planning.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I've been struggling with in my mind, because we are such a small school and having just that. And our teachers, my teachers come in, they're at 7:30 until 3:30.
Right.
And so even when we have an early release, our early release isn't until 1:30 because we share busing. So we can't, and we share busing in the morning, so to get them to come in later it's an extra cost to the district.
Yep.
So I'm really struggling with that one a little bit. So I was just wondering. Thank you.
Brian, if I could just say, now I just really want to also share just a little bit of context. You know, Sanborn, Rochester, to some degree in a different ways, Sauhegan High School and Epping were the first districts and schools in this effort, right? And they were selected, one, because they expressed an interest in doing this, but also they had been doing a lot of this work for a little while, for a few years coming in, and they've been working with Rose Colby and others. But with that said, even there, that's a continuum, right? Really, Sanborn and Rochester had done the most work in terms of multiple years of preparation. I would say that's not necessarily the case for Epping nor for Sauhegan. Sauhegan's been involved in the Coalition for Essential Schools, so they've been doing performance assessment for a number of years as part of their culture. But I guess the thing I would just kind of put out there is that you want to think about how do you make change in your district, you know. You're hearing one way that it's being done, and it was done by a very strong leadership team that all came together and kind of moved the whole district kind of en masse, you know, through multiple years of work. And that's really a tremendous story that Sanborn has to describe that. But there are other districts that are in PACE now in various levels that are doing it a different way. And so you might want to think about, you know, it's great to hear Sanborn's story, but everybody's story is a little different. And your story may be a little different, how you affect change in your districts, different scale, you know, different magnitude of change. I'll just give an example. Concord came in, they came in this past year. They really are still doing some of the preparatory work as they're coming in. But they have some capacity to do that, and they're working through it. So I just wanted to put that out there that, you know, it's more important to think about, okay, how do I make change in my district? Certainly, you know, having the exemplar of a Sanborn where they can tell you all the things you gotta think about, but you might do it your way, you know. So I'm just want you to think about it that way.
We are from Pinkerton. We're sort of in a unique situation because we're our own district, and we're making a lot of progress in our own school. But do you offer any thoughts on how we could help encourage our sending districts to get on board? We've got how many towns? 6 or 7 towns.
So 7 towns feeding into Pinkerton. Pinkerton's going in one direction and the 7 sending are,
All over the place.
wow, interesting.
Because then the kids get to Pinkerton and it's a kind of a new way of thinking for the kids too,
Sure.
not only for the parents and the teachers, but the kids, and they're like, wait a minute, I can't passively receive information, you know, because some of that experience may be carried over with them. That's not to say all of their sending districts do that, it's not to say that, but it's just different.
And then if we're trying to affect some change and trying to get our Pinkerton community, the parents and stakeholders involved, it's hard, or I could see challenges in getting that buy-in when they're not seeing, well, why I'm not, Darien or Hampstead or Chip, isn't that same movement coming from there as well?
I don't think it's impossible. I think you have your work cut out for you as far as 7 communities, but if you build a strong enough system at the high school level, parents will start asking questions, hey, why isn't this happening at it almost has to be a sort of a push-down approach, whereas if you have a strong system at the high school, parents start asking questions about why can't we get this in our middle and elementary schools and start to affect some change that way. I will say that the whole PACE program, we started off with 4 schools, we're up to 8. It's going to continue to grow, so at some point here, I would anticipate that some of those sending schools will be in the wings having these conversations about, hey, let's take a closer look at this whole competency-based education model, because it's not going away. And we saw on Paul's map yesterday how it's taking hold across the country, and it's certainly taking hold in New Hampshire. So I think we're going to see that shift happening. So the stronger you can build your system at the high school level to start out, I think the better off.
Brian, if I could also add to that, you might actually think about having a conversation with Peter Warburton at SAU 39. Now, it's a much smaller scale, right? But Sauhegan came in, and the 2 districts that are essentially sending to Sauhegan's actually its own district.
Oh, okay.
Amherst and Mount Vernon didn't come in initially. And so Peter kind of went through a whole kind of process of thought and engagement. So the middle school now is in Tier 2, has been for a year. And he started looking at, who's there and, how that might change over time. And now the elementary schools are coming in. So it might be just a good conversation. He's somebody who had to kind of think about starting from that place,
I was just going to add that there were little things that happened in our conversations with parents that were real aha moments for us, that I think, the 4-point scale, for instance, talking to parents about that, and these guys, the high school people, did an awesome job really articulating, 4-point scale is what colleges use. And, equating some of this work to advanced teaching, or the idea that the things that they were doing at the high school, like extended learning time and internships, those were just advancing some of our strongest students and giving them more opportunities. So, a lot of the dialogue was about how we were raising standards here. And for me, when parents hear that, maybe that's okay, that's a good thing, right? I think I'd like that. That's not, so I think it's how you sell it a little bit.
I also think, and I'm going to be very direct and blunt, and I don't want to offend Marianne or Paul. I'm going to say something they won't say. You were supposed to be doing this in 2009 if you're in high school, right? Let's be real. It's 2016. It's okay to use some shaming. Seriously, I mean, it's 2016, and as a state, we moved this way 7 years ago.
And now we're K-12. Confidence.
So when you're talking with those folks, in your district who are sending folks to you, it's okay to tell them that. Hey, this is where we're going. This is where the state's going. We were supposed to have been there already.
No, I was just going to say, I am a parent of one of your schools in Chester, and what I would love to see is for you guys to come to our school board meetings and present this to our parents and to our school board so they're aware of it, and making connections with the administrative team at our schools, and just, banding together. Chester would be a good place to start because it's a smaller school. We're a K-3, one building, but.
And Dr. Lockwood is interested in that.
Yeah, I'd love to have you guys. It would be great. I think the parents would really welcome that.
I think that parent perspective is important. Other questions? Mary Ann?
I wanted to say something about the question about how do you support or urge the sending schools when you have other communities feeding into your schools that are moving forward. And I just want to remind folks that this is a change not just for your faculty and your leadership. This is a change for students too. And students have been taught, they come into school with kind of a wide mindset. They abstract information from everything they see, smell, touch, hear, and put in their mouths, right? And then slowly we teach them, keep your hands to yourself, keep your eyes on your desk, don't put things in your mouth, sit still, be quiet, just use your ears, right? I mean, that's how we were taught. So they have to unlearn that when you go to competency education. So when they come into you from sending schools, you have kind of a bigger job of reorienting your kids to be competency-based learners, not just your teachers to be competency-based providers. So I think if you're attentive to that, the kids are the one that bring the message back to their parents and say, my high school is great. And so that parents start thinking about, well, I want that for my younger kids too when they talk to their communities. It's just a thought.
As I mentioned earlier, having it at the elementary levels and having it grow from there has helped us tremendously in that regard, because those students at the elementary levels don't know any different. To see our kids and how engaged they are in the learning process and establishing their own learning goals on a regular basis with their teachers in the classroom, and then working through those, it's fascinating to watch. Absolutely fascinating. And they don't know any different when they go from the elementary to the middle school, and then we're going to start seeing them in the high school in another year or two. The early batch, if you will, will start working its way through the system. So it does take time, but the positive changes are evident and exciting to see.
If I may, just want to go off something that Mary Ann said that kind of struck with me. I think we here at the high school were very sensitive to some of the traditions that our families come in with, things that they expect their kids are going to experience when they're here in high school. And not all traditions that high schools do fit with a competency-based model, so you have to kind of pick and choose which traditions you're going to keep and not keep, and if there are ones you're not going to keep, how are you going to phase them out over time? And a great example for us, it was just the whole discussion around valedictorian, salutatorian, right? You're ranking kids against each other versus ranking them against a standard. Totally goes against the competency-based approach, right? So, but we recognize that there is tradition at graduation that you've named a valedictorian, and there's nothing fundamentally wrong with acknowledging somebody for having perhaps the highest GPA value, but why do we have to make a huge deal out of that, right? Why do they have to automatically be the person that speaks at graduation, that speaks for the class, that is announced 3 months before graduation even happens, right? So those are things we thought very carefully about how we could preserve the tradition without making it the spectacle that it had been for many years. And keeping some of those things in there for parents does allow them to start to accept some of the changes that you want to make. And just so you know, what we decided to do was we name a valedictorian, they get named at the graduation ceremony, not before. They are not the speaker necessarily, because we choose our graduation speakers based on people who apply months before graduation to be a graduation speaker. And their speeches are reviewed by a jury of faculty, because we pick the best speeches and the best student public speakers to exhibit their skills to an audience, right? It might be the valedictorian. Sometimes it is. Oftentimes they do apply. But so that's just one small way that I think we kept our feet in both worlds. and slowly navigated our community to a place where they could accept what we were doing.
Did you keep National Honor Society?
We did, yep, we have National Honor Society, yep. But we, you know, small things like class rank, we used to have a dinner that we did every spring. It used to be called the top 10% dinner. If you were in the top 10% of the class, you got invited to the dinner, right? So we did away with highlighting class rank in ways like that, and we moved instead to acknowledging that we could have summa cum laude and magna cum laude graduates, people that cross a certain threshold of a GPA. There might be 5 kids, there might be 10 kids, there might be 30 kids. But anybody that crosses that threshold of magna cum laude got invited to the dinner. And what ended up happening with that? Well, the numbers haven't changed a lot. It's still roughly 10% of our class. Every year I always check this for Dr. Blake and report back to him that all of the students who would have qualified for the top 10% dinner also are Magna and Summa graduates, and usually there's 1 or 2 other students who were on the cusp. They were like the top 12% or something. They end up making it based on that. But you don't get the student who's slacked off, whose work-study habits were not what you would have wanted. They're all really good kids that reach that academic threshold. So.
Are there questions around leadership issues? You're all ready to go back and tackle this in your own communities?
How often does your leadership team meet, and what does one look like?
Not often enough. There's 14 people on the leadership team. It's myself, Ellen, my special ed administrator, Jody, from the central office, and then all the principals, assistant principals, and then my facilities and tech director. There's 14 of us. We try to meet twice a month as a larger team, and then we go around, the central office folks, Ellen, Jody, and I go around to each school every week and try to hit their meetings, their in-building administrative meetings. I wish it could be more, because I think we would get more done. Some of those meetings are short, you know, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, and sometimes if we have a lot to discuss, we'll do extended meetings where we'll say, okay, let's get dinner tonight, and we'll go for 3 or 4 hours.
Maybe we should describe your leadership style, Dr. Blake. What do you say? Team.
Should you guys, or should I describe my leadership style?
I think we should describe his.
I want to start, and then I'll turn it over.
Okay. She's
So way back at the beginning of PACE, we came here for a PACE meeting. Paul and I are sitting together. Well, it was at a conference around PACE, and so a lot of districts are there, and we happen to be sitting at the Sanborn table. And throughout this meeting, Sanborn faculty from around the room are coming up to the table and crouching down beside Brian and saying, "That gave me a great idea. I would like to do that in my classroom." And he says, "Go for it and tell me how it works." Another half hour goes by and another group of teachers come over and they crouch down beside the table and they say, "We just had this great idea, and we started drawing out this way that we can record how students are doing their work so they can be in charge of their own work." And he says, "That's a great idea. Go do that and tell me how it works." And this went on throughout the day. And Paul and I are kind of, you know, our jaw is dropping, and we're thinking as we drive back to the department about the distributed leadership and how Brian himself, he doesn't tell them what to do. He listens for the good ideas and supports them within his own people. And now I'll let you describe what it's like.
So in a nutshell, before these guys dig in, and maybe I should leave or something, I don't know. My leadership style is what I would call servant leadership. It's something that I did my doctoral dissertation on, and it's being in the service of others. And so I think that ties into what Marianne just said, in terms of making sure that people have the tools that they need to do their work, giving them the opportunities to take chances, not every idea that they bring to me, I say, go for it, but many I do. I have full confidence in the leadership team to make the right decisions, and I'm comfortable with them making decisions, and I think that's tough for a lot of superintendents to let go of that. That's a tough spot for many of my colleagues. I'm not going there. There's a line there. So I'll let these guys talk.
You're gonna leave the room though, right?
No.
I can leave.
I know, I know you put us on, sorry.
Yeah.
But just one of the things is that, when someone says to you, I know nothing about curriculum, I don't, but I have confidence that you do, your reaction is, at least in my case, was, I better know my stuff here. Because he's putting a lot of confidence in me to be good at this, because he's readily saying, I don't necessarily have to be an expert at everything, but I'm gonna find the people who are. And to me, I had a lot of superintendents before this, but it's not really about Brian, but it's a leadership piece. The superintendents who had confidence and gave us leadership roles, those are the ones that pushed the ideas and made things happen, and Brian's absolutely done that. And every once in a while I am a little nervous that he doesn't know anything about curriculum, but I deal with it.
In 7 going on 8 years, I've learned a lot about curriculum.
I tell him everything, he hates it, but yeah.
But Brian he uses an analogy a lot of boating and rowing in the same direction, and I think that really speaks a lot to his leadership style. So if you could imagine him sitting his team down on the dock saying, okay guys, we have to decide where we're going to go, and leading the group to a discussion where they can decide where they're going to be rowing the boat to, then at some point everybody's going to get in the boat and start working together as a team to row to wherever we said we were going to row. And we're going to encounter things on the way, and there are times in our buildings that we have to figure things out on our own, and we have the trust from him that we know he's going to support the decisions we have to make along the way. When there's opportunity to stop and think about next steps, he's going to give us feedback. He's going to ask pointed questions that make us think about some of the decisions that we're making. But I mean, we've reached a point now, 7 years, 8 years later, where turnover is very small in our team. That's huge. The reason for that is, why would we want to go to another team when we feel supported, fulfilled, and at a point where we can make decisions and do what we love doing, which is why we got into school administration to begin with?
Quite simply, I think, and obviously I moved to a different position at this point, but
He jumped out of the canoe.
He doubled our turnover rate.
still here right now.
Ruined our percentage, Vanderbilt.
But Dr. Blake models for principals how we can model for teachers and how teachers can model for their students. So how many of you have read Daniel Pink's Drive? So that whole, which is what Ellen was alluding to, he puts his faith in us that we are going to continue to move forward as a team, collaboratively, to support student learning, and that's what it comes down to. Is what we're doing supportive of students' learning, and then provides us with the resources that we need to do that to the best of his ability. And we have this continued support, felt this continued support in knowing that he was going to support us should we need it. So again, it's that modeling of that for principals who then are modeling that willingness to allow innovation in classrooms, and then that is competency education. Because then teachers are doing that for their students. They're allowing students to try different things and learn through that process, which is what we've all done under his leadership.
I feel like I'm in a memorial service. He was a great guy.
They haven't killed me yet.
No, but we've all worked for people that either block or definitely don't help move the cheese forward. So
But
it
here-
is very important to have somebody at the helm who's receptive to the ideas, who's open to knowing that they're not gonna have all the answers, and they're going to give others the opportunity to be part of that journey.
We've made some hard decisions, like, one of the things, we don't necessarily follow the money, just because we get money offered to us to do things. That kind of leadership to say, yeah, it's $100,000, that sounds awesome, but that's not what we're doing, so we're not going down that road, you know, and it's easy to just keep taking the money and doing things. So that's a little resolute leadership, you know, stay in the course.
But you know, whoever your superintendents are in your districts or headmaster, you can take that leadership role in terms of having confidence and having faith in your staff, your teachers, to make the right decisions, to take chances, to have the confidence that they need to move things forward. And hopefully your superintendents will see that and acknowledge it, by virtue of the fact of the good work that's gonna come out of that style of leadership and behavior. So our teachers, I kinda wish that Mark was here. Our teachers feel very comfortable taking chances in the classroom and trying different things, because they know that we're all supportive of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to have our kids learn and produce and be able to demonstrate. So there's a comfort level there that I think has taken time to grow. Again, time is a key factor. This isn't something that was developed overnight. In fact, when I came here 7, going on 8 years ago, it was completely the opposite. So,
I think too, from just a leadership, from the PACE project field, just decisions, our administrators have made really good decisions, like they've attended all the meetings that the teachers had to attend for the PACE from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, I think we overwhelmed the state because we showed up en masse to all meetings. And we sat next to our teachers in the tables with them when they were learning this process, right, all the principals, assistant
it
principals.
wasn't something they had to do that we sent them off to do
Right.
and bring back.
So they knew that the administrators were in the game with them. I think that was a smart leadership thing.
I'd also say, Ellen, that having 1 or 2 people either in your district or in your building that are sort of the spokespersons, we found in the first year of PACE, because the waiver system happened so late, and Paul can better describe this, but essentially it was a back and forth with the USED, where they would sort of give us a provisional acceptance and say, the project looks great, but how about if you tweak these things? And then that was the December report, and so folks would get together and tweak those things, and then the January report come out. And so it was late in March, I think, when we finally got the final approval for PACE from the U.S. Department of Education. And so that year's implementation was, at the building level, was rushed.
Right.
So if you were in one of the schools in Epping, Sauhegan, Rochester, or Sanborn, you essentially had a couple of months to pull this together, administer the assessments, go through all the scoring protocols, all that stuff. There were some mistakes that were made in that first year, things that we didn't know to anticipate, problems that we didn't foresee. In the second year, what we did is appointed some spokespeople to sort of be the liaisons. And those spokespeople went to every teacher who was implementing a PACE assessment to make sure that there was a personal message delivered, sort of a cheerleading, you can do this, it's important, here's some things you should remember when you're administering the assessments. And that way we could guarantee a level of consistency in the administration that we didn't have the prior year. I think that was something, if we could go back in time, we would have done that first year and said, who are our 2 spokespeople that are going to go out and be the people that are going to do all of the talking around the district in the different buildings at different grade levels, so that everybody's getting the same message.
Communication was key, for sure. Making sure that everybody had the same message across the district, because we couldn't afford to have mistakes being made because one person in one building got this message and somebody else got a different message in the next building, or even sometimes the next classroom over. So communicating was crucial throughout the process. Michael alluded to the notion that it was rushed at times, and it was sloppy. And I think while the rushed piece may be over, in that we have some timelines established now, and the PACE assessments themselves will fall into place wherever they fall naturally in the curriculum. Some of the work is going to continue to be sloppy, I think, in terms of task development and things like that, and it's not easy work. It's going to take time and a lot of effort on the part of teachers, but when you hear the teachers talk, it's the right work. It's the work that they want to be doing, and they see the importance of it, and so they don't mind putting in the hard work. I think historically we haven't given our teachers nearly enough credit for the work that they do and the knowledge that they have and the expertise that they have. And I think that, you know, capturing that and harnessing that has been a major point for us in the district.
See, I think what we have now is a different kind of sloppy. I think we had sloppy before, but the sloppy was a parent calls, they have a question about their kid's class in a grade, and the first thing you have to do as the principal is look up which teacher they have or which subject they're talking about, because that's going to dictate how you answer, because every department or subject is approaching things differently with assessment and grading, or every teacher is different. And now we don't have that. We have the same consistent approach to assessment and grading, whether it's a kindergarten classroom or a 12th grade classroom and everything in between. And it's appropriate for kids, and it's centered on student learning. So that is now a type, and that used to be the loose, the sloppy.
Other questions?
Brian, 7 years ago, you must have a few independent contractors working in buildings. How have you worked with that over the years? Have they weeded themselves out, or?
Great question, and I love the political correctness with which you speak. I don't know if folks heard in the back, when I first arrived, we probably had some independent contractors working in the district, and how we've worked through that over the years. And, I have to say, yes, we did, and we still have a few. But I think that what we've been able to do over time is, as with any change process, you have your early adopters, you have your middle of the road, and then you have your I'll call them laggards, but I don't know if that's the right word either. But we've been able to make the changes that we saw appropriate, and a lot of those folks who didn't necessarily buy into the direction that we're going, they elected to go work someplace else. And some of them were good teachers, they just didn't fit our model, and that's okay. And so was it 3 years ago now? We sort of did have a conversation at my closing comments at the end of the school year. Basically, the train's left the station, and if you don't want to be here, that's okay to find another job over the summer. We wish you well. And a couple did. We've had teachers leave, as I said, we've had teachers leave who were very good teachers. They just didn't fit in our model, and that's okay. The teachers who remain, we continue to work with. We try to work to their strengths and put them in positions where either A, they are supported by other strong teachers who can help them along, or put them in positions where they have a lesser impact on the greater system. Michael?
I'd also add that in mentioning the 18 or 19 questions that you have to ask yourself when you start down this journey, one of them is around how are you going to monitor and evaluate supervised staff. Because in this system, you should be looking for different things than you looked for in the old system, right? So if you have independent contractors, in some schools, right, it's perfectly acceptable and okay, and you can thrive in that environment. It's actually the norm, where teachers go into their classroom, close the door, they're a kingdom unto themselves, and they have at it. But in a competency-based system where you know it's so rooted in professional learning communities and having to share your student work with other teachers and come around the table and analyze, you know, the student's performance and how you could instruct that better and get feedback from your colleagues, you assess and when you evaluate what's important to you. So if you're still in a system that assesses teachers as independent contractors, you should expect to have independent contractors. And by that I mean, if you really value the professional learning community model, you should be looking for that level of performance as part of the teacher evaluation system. You should be looking for that collaboration. You should be expecting that, that they're working with their colleagues in a positive way to move the district's goals forward. And if not, you should be mentioning that in your evaluations.
And we've obviously used turnover to bolster our cadre, our army of folks who are supportive of what we're doing. You know, of the teacher panel that was at the end of the day yesterday, there were seven high school teachers up there, and it occurred to me when I was looking at all of them that all but one of them only have 1, 2, or 3 years experience in our school. And they were up there as the teachers panel, and they've signed up to work the design studio later this week. The one that didn't have less than 3 years, she's got 5. So we brought a lot of people in who buy into what we're doing and applied for the job here because they want to work that way.
That we're doing. Right.
Yeah.
And our supervision and evaluation model captures a lot of what Michael was just talking about. We have a segment of our supervision and evaluation model that just looks at their work as part of a professional learning community. And they're assessed on that. We do many walkthroughs so that we're in the classroom much more than the once or twice a year dog and pony show. I'm gonna, you know, you give me your lesson plan, I'm gonna come in and sit there for 40 minutes, watch what you do, and then we'll talk about it afterward. We do that when and if we have to, or if teachers want particular supports in a certain area. But for the most part, it's walk-through observations. We do what we call virtual data walks, where we can look at the back end of the technology that they use. So we can see what their grade books look like. We can see how they're assessing students and how often they're assessing students and what those things look like. We look at My Learning Plan is where we capture all of our professional development time. We can look at that. We look at attendance and all those different kinds of things through the technology, and we capture that as well in the supervision and evaluation model. So it's multifaceted, and it gives us a better picture of the teachers, because we've had some rock star teachers in the classroom who can't get along with their peers. In a professional learning community-based model, you gotta be able to play well in the sandbox with other people, or you're not gonna make it. And we've seen that. Question out back.
My question was in regards to retention, going back to
Yeah.
what Brian said. So at Pinkerton, we're having talks about retirees joining the party and getting on the bus, moving the train forward. And then the flip piece is hiring. And in trying to find teacher colleges who are teaching competency-based learning versus old school traditional teaching. And I find that you're in elementary, middle school, methodology, instructional-based practices are a focus, whereas high school seems to be more of a content, and then they get a class on methods, so they get smaller. And trying to collaborate with some of these universities on how to promote getting on the bus. And getting teachers, the 22-year-olds coming out of college, ready to teach. How do we do that? Are they coming in to student teach? Now, we have to train them on our way, since they've been already trained. And if they don't get a good student teacher, now we're backpedaling even more.
That's a great question, and the Institutes of Higher Education, IHE, in New Hampshire, are doing a lot of work around that very issue in terms of changing how they're preparing teachers coming out of New Hampshire schools for teaching in the competency-based model. We're actually working with Southern New Hampshire University to have some of their pre-service and in-service teachers come here, starting this year, to work with us around competency-based, teaching in a competency-based model. So there is a lot of movement in the field toward better education of pre-service teachers around competency-based education, and work in terms of in-service teachers being able to go back and receive some additional supports in ththose areas as well.
But I actually think as someone who's had to do a lot of interviews over the years for folks, I don't think that's where the biggest issue is. Because I think a lot of the kids coming out of college are just so ready to jump into whatever that situation's going to be. I think for us, the key is we have solid PLC teams that they come into that help assimilate them into how we do business. For me, I worry more about the people who apply, either that are coming from industry that have no teaching experience, or they're coming with X number of years experience in a traditional school and they've already they're set on how they do things. Those are the ones that a teacher prep program isn't going to help, but the ongoing PD is going to be key.
Right.
So
One of
if
the
I could
things is
just
the
add,
coachability.
Right?
I mean, how
Oh,
coachable
yeah.
are they?
Right.
How willing and open are they? So your 1 to 5 year teacher is going to have that drive, especially when the PR out there for Sanborn is, we do this and
Yeah.
they're coming in.
We put it right in our job description.
Yes.
It will actually say, we're looking for someone who's going to collaborate on a PLC team, you're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, here's how it works. Go to competencyworks.org, read the different articles that are there. We're going to talk about them in the job interview because this is who we are and what we do. With that one. I didn't mean to cut you off.
well, if I could just add, Commissioner Berry has taken this particular issue on as a major effort, and I will just say that, I guess it was 4 years ago, we brought in a guy by the name of Gene Wilhoit. You may or may not have heard his name. He was the former executive director of the Chief State School Officers nationally, and he met with the New Hampshire IHE network, and there literally was almost a fist fight in that meeting. And he was talking about student-centered, competency-based, personalized learning, and they're going, who are you kidding, and they literally got into it with him. And so we've gone from that situation to a situation where 3 New Hampshire IHEs are essentially piloting the work that Brian is talking about with Southern New Hampshire. Also, Upper Valley Training Institute is doing something, as well as Keene State College. And then also several others, Granite State, University of New Hampshire, and Plymouth State are very interested in kind of coming in a second cohort. So this is a very active conversation now in educator preparation programs, and expect to see more. I think it's going to start moving very quickly, similar to what's going on at the K-12 level.
We also have a relationship with the MIT is bringing some of their students to our school. And I don't know if anyone saw the Nicole published piece about all the colleges in New England who are adopting competency-based. You'd be surprised to see all the colleges on that list. It's quite a few, including Harvard. Not
It is interesting, and just to piggyback on something Ellen just said, two years ago now, you had the conversation with the Institutes of Higher Ed. Here at Sanborn, we had a college fair, and we invited all of the admissions folks to the college fair, and before that, we had a sit-down conversation with them about our competency-based grading and our transcripts and stuff. And
every institution in New Hampshire was present except for Dartmouth. There were over 30 of them in the room, and universally the praise was there for competency-based education. They weren't ready to jump in it yet, but they loved the concept, they loved what they were seeing. They liked our report card, our transcript, the theory behind it. The only advice they gave us, they said, keep going forward, we love it, just don't do away with college rank and grade point average. That they felt strongly that they needed some way to do some comparison, students to students. But in terms of the concepts of competency-based education, so I met with 30 of them in that venue, and over the last 5 years, 140 different post-secondary institutions I've met with, and haven't gotten a single negative bit of feedback about competency-based education.
And that goes a long way with our community. When we can have that conversation and the parents say, well, this school said such and, no, they didn't. No, because we've had the conversation with them and this is what they're reporting on, what they think of our transcript and our report card. So that communication and that opportunity to have those conversations with parents has been fantastic.
I think a lot of colleges, it's a business model. They recognize that to stay in business, they have to adapt. And competency education is one way that they have to adapt to stay in business in order to survive in the next 20 or 30 years. So the ones that really get that have already started moving that way and are seeing the fruits of their labor. Others who are lagging behind are quickly realizing they may be out of business in a few years if they can't get their act together. We have one private school coming to the design studio next week, for the rest of this week. The sole reason they're coming is for this reason. They are trying to compete with the other area private schools around them, and they're going to use competency education as what separates them from the pack. Smart.
Dr. Blake was mentioning, one of the things we did when we sat down with those 30+ New Hampshire post-secondary institutions is we gave them a transcript and report card from our old system, which looked very traditional, just final grades, percentages, and we gave them samples of a similar student with a different transcript in our new report card and said, which student would you take? And it was so obvious by looking at the students' transcripts and report cards, because the new transcript and the new report cards had things separated out. So you could actually see the students' academic scores, which were very pure and rated against the competencies. You could see the students' composite scores in their work-study practices, right? And you could see students' attendance. And in the old system, it was just final grade. And so you could have a B in all of your classes and be a lousy student, just having amassed enough points to get the B, but never handing things in on time, having really bad attendance at school, or not doing well in any of your work-study practices. So the colleges were like, universally said, oh yeah, we'll take student B because we know exactly what their work ethic is, we can see what their academic potential is, we can see whether or not they show up to school. All those important things were so much more evident in our new materials.
How many folks are going to be with us the next couple of days? Oh, okay. Great. Good number of you. All right. So you'll get lots more information in the next few days about all of these topics, including the list of 19 things that you asked about.
To be on the there.
Sanu is going to be here, MIT. They'll both be speaking about how they're doing teacher prep programs, reimagining them.
Any closing thoughts, comments, questions? Additional questions?
I have a question for Ellen. Ellen, I think the original agenda said 2:30 that there was going to be another panel. Is there no other panel?
On the original agenda?
Yeah, we did say a panel again today.
Yeah, no, there won't be another.
Okay.
So, Brian, if you could just leave them with some thoughts about when they go back to their districts, what's the first thing they should do?
The first thing you should do when you go back to your district is take a day or two to digest all this, because it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's a whole paradigm shift for many of you in terms of how you're used to operating. And so my first suggestion would be to take a couple of days to digest all of what you've heard or what you're going to hear in the next 3 days, so it's a full week of this stuff. And then pick an entry point. And, you know, your entry point may be grading, it may be assessment, it may be a particular piece of instruction that you wanna look at, but pick an entry point, and that's different for everybody. You know, it depends on where you are as a district. And then focus on that area and become an expert in that area as best you can. Focus your energies, focus your resources, think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and just small chunks, one bite at a time.
Can I weigh in on that one? You know how if you're a school district and you've been trying really hard and you think, you're just wondering, why aren't we doing better? You know, why aren't we doing better, right? And for us, for a while, we kind of felt that way. And Dr. Blake the high school did it too, but we got into a room, and I suggest that anyone who's having that feeling, like, why aren't we getting results? Why aren't things better for us? I would get into a room with a whiteboard, and I'd get a few pens, and I'd start to write down everything that you think you're doing in your district that's an initiative. Just write them all down, and then step back and look at the map in front of you, and then start crossing stuff out. Because the reason why we were spinning our wheels, I believe, and spinning around the drain, was that we were trying to keep together so many things and be good at so much stuff. The high school not only, they did this exercise themselves, and they had more initiatives because they were a school, and that added on to their world. So it's amazing when you reflectively look at what you're holding everyone, including yourself, accountable in the system.
You do need to take stock of where you are, for sure. For sure. We filled up, we were in the old SAU office, and it was a long classroom, probably, well, it was longer than this, right? Probably maybe 1.5, almost 2 of these, that we filled up with all the different initiatives, or what we thought were initiatives. And then we started looking at them. Is this an initiative that has gone by the wayside? Is it something that we need to continue? Or is it something that's become part of the fabric of who we are? It's really not an initiative anymore, so let's stop calling it that. We've been doing it for years and it's working, okay. And we were able to whittle that down considerably. So in closing, just to go back to Mary Ann's question, take some time, digest it, take stock where you are as a district now, look at where you want to go, and then just take small bites and become experts there before moving on. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and take your time. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Now, are they going to reconvene, or are we done for the day? What's the rest of the afternoon look like? Break time?
Yeah, I think.
We ended like 10 minutes early. I mean, we can continue, but we've got to continue chatting. But there's no panel at 2:30?
Teachers were yesterday.
I'm sorry?
The teachers were yesterday.
Okay.
So SAU 23 wants to just get together maybe in the cafeteria for a few minutes to process before we go, if there's no panel.